Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee here at County Hall on Tuesday, the 3rd of August. Just first of all, to go through procedure at our planning committees. I, as chair of the committee, introduce the item and then hand over to the planning officer, who takes us through his presentation, giving us any updates or changes to recommendations. We then have a public speaking slot, 5 minutes for objectors, 5 minutes for local members, i.e. parish councillor, county councillor, and then 5 minutes for the applicant or the supporter. We then have questions to the planning officers. Members of the committee can ask the planning officers any questions about the application, and then we proceed with the debate proper, asking for a proposal, a seconder, a debate, and then obviously we would take the vote on that item. Apologies for absence. Apologies for absence have been received from Guy Renner Thompson.
And also from Councillor Watson.
Councillor Watson. Thank you.
I've just answered a text already. Councillor Lyle Darwin, he's forgotten his pass, so I've told him to go to reception and get an emergency vote, you know, the spare one. So he might be a little few minutes late. He's saying, am I in planning? Can I help him get in the door? And I'm here. I'm not going to. I don't know which door. He's under it.
Well, we might give him a minute or two to get up the stairs. So, apologies for absence have been received and recorded. Minutes of the previous meeting. Minutes of the previous strategic planning meeting held on Tuesday the 6th of July have been circulated. Are members happy to confirm them as a true record of that meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Disclosures of members' interests. Any members got any disclosures in the item before us this afternoon? Councillor Flux?
Thank you, and I might take my time given Councillor Darwin's coming up the stairs. On item 6 on the agenda, which is 21/00842/VAREIA, which is at the southwest sector, Beacon Lane, Cramlington. I am a resident of Langdale Drive, which is mentioned several times within the report and within the pictures. I'm also going to speak on behalf of residents, so I will take no part in the voting part of that application. I will exercise my right to speak as a ward member, Chair.
Thank you. Good. So that's the only declaration of a disclosure, and that takes us to determination of planning applications.
Chair, shall I just ring him and then I'll find out?
Yeah,
I know once you start.
that's him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where are you? Yeah, is it the tech bar, right? Okay. We're just about to start. You need to get here very, very quickly. I think you understood that.
If he's at the tech bar, he's not far away.
I mean, with the up and down, you know, it's quite difficult for even older members. Never mind you.
Chairman, would it be worth going for me to go and meet him just to drag him a bit faster?
Do you know where he is?
What, just follow
I think
I wouldn't. We'll just sit still and wait for him. It'll only be a minute or so.
Yeah. Still a few jokes to me.
You can tell a joke, Trevor.
I don't know any jokes, I'm afraid, Richard. You're the joker. Have you not got one to...
Can say something else?
Can we turn off the video streaming while we do this?
I'd never put it on, actually.
Someone turn it off.
We'll not embarrass Councillor Darwin when he walks in, will we?
We won't, but you will.
I'm sure he will evolve, Chair.
Says he's on his way.
Here we are.
That's the end of the meeting.
Welcome. So we'll now begin, ladies and gentlemen. We're all here. So we've got one item of business this afternoon, and that's a planning variation of condition 4. It relates to land at the southwest sector, Beacon Lane, Cramlington, where we're proposing to substitute house types on 715 plots. And of course, also within that application is some changes to the section 106. But now, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I will ask our planning officer, Jeff Horsfield, to speak to the item. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Right, if I can just start off this afternoon just with some updates from the report that you have for the meeting. We'll look at the site and the proposals in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation, but just by way of updates to start with. Firstly, just an update in terms of section 106 agreement matters that are mentioned in the report. There's reference in the report to a viability review clause being provided for in any section 106 agreement were you to support the application this afternoon. In terms of that review clause, reference is made in the report to 3 areas that would cover. There's mention of foundation costs and also mention of costs related to changes to Part L of the building regulations, and then also reference to costs related to, again, changes to the building regulations into what's called future homes. So just an update there, kind of since the report was circulated, we have had some further discussions with the applicant and also with an external quantity surveyor who's been advising officers on the applicant's viability appraisal and abnormal costs. And the proposal now is that that review mechanism, as I say, if you supported the application, would only cover foundation costs and the future homes costs, not the Part L costs. So I'll explain that in a little bit more detail later in the presentation, the reasons for that change. But that's the first update. The second update from your report just relates to a number of minor changes to the conditions towards the end of your report. Again, these are just by way of update. So we've had some further amended drawings submitted to us since your report was circulated. Those amended drawings don't change the nature of the proposal in any way. It's still 715 sort of dwellings, house types don't change. Basically, the changes are just basically updates to certain detailed drawings, kind of engineering drawings, external works drawings, just to bring those up to date with the latest proposed site plan that your report was based upon. So given that, as I say, we're just proposing some minor changes to the wording of condition 4 in your report, which is just in terms of drawing numbers, and then there are some minor changes to the wording of conditions 10 and 11, just so that those refer to some detailed landscaping plans that again are referenced in condition sort of 4 in terms of revisions that we've received, and then just to changes to a couple of other conditions as well. In terms of condition 12, which relates to an open space management and maintenance scheme being submitted to ourselves at a later date for approval. Just a minor change to the wording at the beginning of that condition is suggested. At the moment, the condition kind of reads as follows at the start. No development shall take place within any phase. It's proposed just to change that wording so it reads as follows: no dwelling plot development shall take place above damp proof course level within any phase. So that's just to allow a little bit more time after works have begun on site for the applicant to basically submit that open space management and maintenance scheme to us. That change was requested by the applicant and his officers. We don't see that as unreasonable. As I say, it still gives ample time for those details to be agreed with ourselves. And then just one final change to condition 23, which relates to site levels. At the moment, that refers to some details that were approved previously in respect of site levels, and I would just again propose to add some text to the end of that condition, just to read as follows: as amended by the approved plans referenced in condition 4 above. So again, that's just a reference back to some updated plans we've had that would be referred to in condition 4 around finished floor levels for the proposed dwellings. So in a sense, the levels details will be in accordance with what was approved previously, but taking account of the revised finished floor levels that are shown on this updated external works plan that we've had that would be referenced in condition 4. So that's it by way of updates. So if I just come now to the presentation, if you just bear with me, I'll just need to log in again. There we go, right. What's happened there? Let's have a look. Right. Okay, so we just start with a little bit of introduction, just in terms of the site itself. There is a description of the site within your report, but essentially you've got there on the screen a location plan of the site. It is a fairly substantial site, covers 34 hectares in total, and essentially comprises former agricultural land on the southwestern edge of Cramlington. Just so you get your sort of bearings, if I can just use my sort of mouse here, you've got so you're in the far southwest corner of Cramlington. You've got the East Coast Main Line here to the east of the site. To the west of the site here you've got the A1068, which goes down to the A19. Arcot Hall, if you know the Arcot Hall Golf Club, that's just to the south in this area, sort of here. So this is the Beacon Hill, existing Beacon Hill housing estate area to the immediate north of the site. Those of you who know Cramlington, the Asir Garden Centre is up here, again just to the sort of north of the sort of site. Just some more slides, just by way of getting your bearings. Just an aerial photograph there of the sort of site. Just some photographs again, just to give you a closer up view of the surroundings. This is taken at the western end of the application site, looking towards properties on Kielder sort of Avenue. You'll notice from your report that we did have some objections to the application from residents in Kielder Avenue. So you can see in the background there some of the existing houses in Kielder Avenue. The area in the foreground is land within the application site. Another photograph there looking sort of north from the application site up Beacon Lane. So this Beacon Lane will be the main access into the site. Sort of from the wider kind of local highway network. The proposals do include improvement works to Beacon Lane. Obviously, at the moment, it's not of a particularly high standard, but that's essentially a view looking up from the site towards the local road network, showing the kind of access location. A view looking in the other direction, looking south this time, down towards, as I say, the direction of Arcot Hall Golf Club and the A19. You can just see in the distance there some of the new housing that's being built to the south by Persimmon and Bellway, which also forms part of the Cramlington Southwest sector site. Again, I've got another slide to show you shortly, just so you understand the kind of context. This is a view looking east along sort of Beacon Lane, along essentially the northern boundary of the site. On the left-hand side of the photograph, you've got some of the existing housing on the Beacon Lane estate, which, as I say, adjacent to the application site, is up to 3 stories in height. This is again another view again down Beacon Lane. There's a section of Beacon Lane which runs north-south through the middle of the application site. So this would be retained as essentially a footpath cycleway route through the site, and is shown sort of there as it is at the moment. And then just a couple of other views. That's a view again looking west across the application site from that north-south Beacon Lane sort of route, and then a few in the other direction looking kind of southeast, and another few east from Beacon Lane. So application site has a very kind of semi-rural character at the moment. As I say, it's former agricultural land, but as I say, has been earmarked for many years for redevelopment for sort of housing as the last quarter, as it were, of Cramlington. Again, just a few there along the northern part of the site. There's an existing footpath cycleway along the northern boundary of the site, and just a few of that. So just by way of sort of context in terms of how this site sort of sits in terms of the Cramlington Southwest sector as a whole. Again, the application site is essentially this area here in the centre of the slide. I'm just kind of highlighting with my sort of kind of mouse. This is the existing Beacon Lane estate here to the north. And then the coloured areas to the south and the west, those are the remainder of the Cramlington Southwest sector site that are currently being developed by Persimmon Homes and Bellway Homes via this new roundabout that's been put in here on Fisher Lane. As I say, the application site itself will be accessed from Beacon Lane, from the north, from Beacon Lane. And the intention eventually is you'll have a through route through the entire southwest sector site, which will come in from Beacon Lane. You'll go through the application site, then through the Persimmon and Bellway site, and then be able to come out again on the new roundabout on Fisher Lane. So I hope that helps just by way of context in terms of seeing where this sort of sits. In terms of the actual proposals themselves, you'll see from your report the proposals are essentially an amendment of a scheme that already has planning permission. Essentially, full planning permission was granted back in 2017 for 715 dwellings on the site. This is the previously approved sort of layout. That permission is still extant because even though it was granted in 2017, some sort of drainage works were carried out on site prior to that permission expiring in May 2017, and we've also discharged all of the pre-commencement conditions that were on that sort of previous permission. So it still is an extant sort of permission. So that's the approved plan from the previous permission. This is the proposed site layout. So just kind of going between the two, you'll see that it's very similar in terms of the areas set aside for kind of build development and those areas that are set aside for kind of open space at either end of the site, and a couple of other open space areas as well, a couple of smaller areas adjacent to the northern sort of boundary. So essentially the proposal that's before you in terms of in terms of design and layout changes is not that different from the previously approved scheme. Essentially, all the changes are the house types, which have been updated to reflect the current house types of the two house builders, Barrett Homes and Keaton Moat Homes, and there are some minor associated changes to site layout in relation to those sort of house type sort of changes. Just in terms of house type changes, obviously there are a fair number of house types on a layout of this size, but just to give you a flavour of some of the house types, again, just before I do that, just an aerial impression there of the application proposal. So essentially, this is the application site in here. So you've got essentially the housing areas, and then areas of open space to the immediate west and east of the site. Also some open space areas to the south. This area in here is where Persimmon and Bellway are developing. The remainder of the southwest sector area, the existing Beacon Lane estate here to the north. So just in terms of house types, just to give you a flavour of those, just to run through, it's a mix of essentially 1 to 3 storey dwellings, with the majority being sort of 2 storeys in height, and there's a mix of detached, semi-detached, sort of terraced sort of properties. But just to give you a flavour of some of the sort of house types that are proposed. So the scheme includes some bungalows as well. And I'll leave that slide for now, perhaps come back to that one later on around Langdale Drive if there are any particular queries on that. Just sticking with the proposals, though, again, the second element of the proposals, and probably the most significant in terms of your consideration this afternoon, are that as well as changing the house types and layout, the applicant is also seeking some changes to the Section 106 agreement that runs alongside the previous permission. Now, those changes are kind of twofold. First of all, there are proposed reductions in Section 106 contributions related to the viability of the scheme. Some further work has been undertaken since the previous permission, looking at the development costs, and in particular some of the abnormal development costs associated with bringing the site sort of forward. And as a result of that, viability information has been presented to the council with the application, which essentially shows a viability deficit of around £3 million, even with the Section 106 reductions that are proposed. Those reductions essentially comprise reducing the affordable housing from 20% of the total number of units down to 8%. So that's a reduction in terms of affordable dwelling numbers from 143 down to 57. There is also a reduction in other sort of Section 106 contributions of around about, well, just over £1 million pounds. That's a reduction from around 8.65 million sort of previously. Down 8.65 million in terms of down to about 7.59 million, so a reduction of just over £1 million. Although, as I say, some of that will be clawed back through other proposals around maintenance of suds, drainage areas and informal open space. So around 926,000 of those costs of 1,065,000, the developer would be looking to basically cover those through essentially recovering maintenance costs for the suds and open space areas from essentially a management company levying charges on future occupiers. The second change in terms of the 106 contributions is that there are some new contributions that wouldn't have been requested previously that we would request now. So those are around ecology, coastal mitigation and healthcare provision in terms of GP sort of infrastructure. So those are having to be factored into the sort of costs as well. So that's just a quick overview of the proposals. Just very quickly, in terms of consultations, there are no changes to your report in terms of further comments from neighbours or consultee responses. Those remain as per your report. So just to very quickly run through some of the key issues that are referenced in the appraisal section of your report. As I say, the principle of the proposed development is considered acceptable, given that, as I say, permission has already been granted for 715 dwellings on the site, and as I say, the changes to house types and the associated layout changes are considered acceptable, as your report concludes, in terms of housing mix design, highways, flooding, drainage, contamination, ecology and archaeology, subject to various conditions. The previous application was accompanied by an environmental statement under the environmental impact assessment regulations. That has been updated in terms of this latest application, and the view of officers is that things haven't changed substantially from the previous scheme, so we would still be of the view that the proposals are acceptable in terms of their environmental effects, again subject to conditions and the 106 agreement provisions. So that, as I say, there are some objections noted in your report, particularly from residents in Kielder Avenue and Langdale Drive. Some changes have been made to the proposals, and those are detailed in your report to try and address those objections. So, for example, in terms of Kielder Avenue, the applicants have amended their plans to remove any 2.5-storey properties. So properties adjacent to Kielder Avenue are now all 2-storey, as per the previously approved scheme. And in terms of Langdale Drive and the concerns that residents have expressed there about this footpath cycleway that comes from the site into Langdale Drive as part of the proposals. That was on the previous scheme, but essentially, again, some amended plans have been submitted to change the specification of that so that it is more akin to a footpath cycleway in terms of its width, and we're also proposing a condition around bollards to control access to that footpath cycleway to make sure it isn't abused by vehicles and is just used for its intended purpose as a footpath cycleway, with obviously access being available for emergency services in the very rare instance that is required. So that really brings us on then to obviously the major issue that I mentioned earlier around the section 106 contribution. And as I say, I mentioned the first issue around there being a number of abnormal costs that were contributing substantially to the scheme being unviable as it stands at the moment with the current 106 contributions. Now, those abnormal costs relate, or the particular abnormal costs that are causing problems in terms of viability relate to foundations and ground remediation works. Some quite substantial parts of the site have been subject to open cast coal mining in the late 1940s and in 1950s, and there are some quite substantial costs potentially in terms of dealing with that contamination and also stabilising the ground and as I say, a possible need for more than your kind of standard foundations because of the ground condition issues. Issues as well around foul sewerage for the site, costs related to that, and then costs related to changes to the building regulations, which will be happening over the next few years, and this is all around CO2 reductions in new housing developments. Essentially, those changes are coming in 2 stages. There are going to be changes between now and 2024, changes to what's called Part L of the building regulations, which will essentially require homes to be insulated to a much higher standard than they are now, so there are additional costs associated with that. And then there's a second stage of changes post 2025, referred to as future homes, the future homes standard, which will introduce, again, even more stringent requirements. An example being you won't any longer be able to have gas boilers new houses, they'll have to be replaced with some sort of alternative installation, a heat pump or some other means of providing heating and hot water for sort of properties. So those are essentially the abnormal costs that, as I say, are causing sort of problems in terms of scheme viability. Obviously, I've mentioned the additional contributions for healthcare and ecology, coastal mitigation. As I say, the applicant has submitted a detailed viability appraisal, including a detailed breakdown of their abnormal costs. And we have had a chartered surveyor within the council, as well as an external quantity surveyor, scrutinise those costs in detail. And our sort of experts in that respect essentially concur with the applicant on this, that there is a viability gap of at least £3 million due to these abnormal sort of costs. So, as I say, the reductions in sort of contributions relate to the affordable housing, 20% down to 8%, and then, as I say, a smaller reduction in the other one of 6 contributions themselves. As I say, the costs have been scrutinised, and as I say, our experts are in agreement with the viability situation. Having said that, some of the a couple of the abnormal costs, there is a degree of uncertainty around those. So the abnormal costs around foundations and those around the future homes standard, kind of post 2025. As I say, they may be subject to change. The foundation costs may change because there is still ground remediation work to be done, and until you actually get a digger in the ground, it's hard to be precise in terms of what those additional foundation costs would be until you're absolutely clear as to what the ground conditions are. That there has been some site investigation work done, but you're never going to get the full picture until you actually start undertaking the site remediation. In terms of future homes, we're not entirely clear at this point in time what the precise government standards are going to be post 2025. We are clearer in terms of the changes to Part L in the next couple of years. So for that reason, as I say, even though we are in agreement in terms of the costs that have been presented by the applicant, and that there is a viability gap of at least £3 million, we would be looking, if you were supportive of the application this afternoon, to have a viability review clause in any Section 106 agreement to look again at those abnormal foundation and future homes costs, probably towards the end of 2024, when there should be greater clarity around those. And obviously, if the costs aren't as great as what's being anticipated at the moment, then that potentially could sort of free up additional monies for sort of Section 106 matters such as affordable housing. I think as well it needs to be borne in mind, looking at this site, that it is a site that has been earmarked for redevelopment for many years as part of the Cramlington South West sector proposal. Whereas the other part of the site to the south that's being progressed by Persimmon and Bellway, that is progressing now. The development of this site has stalled and hasn't started as yet, and that is due to the abnormal development costs that the developer sort of faces, which are different to those that are experienced on the adjacent site to the south. Just in terms of the importance of the South West sector site as a whole, it is by far and away the biggest contributor to the housing supply numbers that we need to achieve for Cramlington over the kind of plan period for the new local plan and the current neighbourhood plan, which runs into the 2030s. So just to set that in context, as I say, the target in terms of dwelling numbers for Cramlington, new dwelling numbers, is at least 2,500 during that sort of period, going into the 2030s. And the southwest sector sites, this is the Persimmon and Bellway site as well as the site before you this afternoon, those contribute the vast majority of those, about 2,300 of those in total. Now there is some surplus provision, as I say, in terms of permissions that we granted to date. including this site and other sites elsewhere in Cramlington. We have completions and permissions of about 3,100 sort of dwellings, but we would still need sort of, as I say, included in that number is the 715 here. So we would still need this site to meet that kind of minimum 2,500 dwelling sort of target. So just really bringing things to a conclusion, the overall view of officers, as outlined in your report, is that the application should be supported, notwithstanding the viability issues, subject to two conditions and a 1 of 6 agreement, but that 1 of 6 agreement should include this viability review sort of clause. So essentially, just coming to the recommendation, that will say just be altered slightly from what's in your report. So essentially, the recommendation is that that you grant sort of planning permission subject to the conditions in your report as amended. Along the lines of what I outlined earlier in terms of conditions 4, 10, 11, 12 and 23, and also subject to the applicants entering into a section 1 of 6 agreement to secure the levels of affordable housing and contributions that are detailed in your report, but with the detail of that viability review mechanism that I mentioned, for that to be determined by the Director of Planning in consultation with the Chair of Strategic Planning Committee before, as I say, any final planning permission is issued following the completion of the 1 of 6 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you. I'm now going to ask the Director of Planning, Rob Murphy, to go through a few issues on this very complicated application. Rob, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just procedurally, I'd just like to confirm the point made by Jeff that this application, and it's been related in the EIA regulation, that the information we have is up to date for making a decision, and the information that's been submitted has been used to inform the mitigation and the conditions and the 106 agreement. Okay. Jeff's made the really important point that this is a very long-standing assumption going back at least 20 years that this site is going to be developed. So we are not talking about the merits as to whether the decision is here or not, because this has been anticipated as a site for a very long period. Okay. The reason why no progress has been made over a long period, and particularly those since the 2017 issue, has been trying to square this circle of getting a viable scheme that we can work on. On that basis, I'd like to give committee reassurance that there has been extensive rolling work with the developer, and we've been pushing very hard to secure both the highest amount of total 106 contributions, but not to a point where financially it kills the scheme. What government advice is about asking for 106 contributions, and they've been clear on this for the last 5 years, is that if the purchase price, which you include in that equation, is too high, you don't pay less Section 106 contributions, you look at adjusting the purchase price. Okay, and that we need to be consistent on. For absolute clarity, we are selling the site here. Okay, but I want to keep a clear division between us asking for the appropriate level of 106 contributions and the County Council, in terms of its capital receipt, seeking, the best return it can do on that. Okay. So my advice will be that the 106 contribution package we have negotiated over an extended period is justifiable. The report, as set out here, talks about a 106 review mechanism that can look at both as more information comes along to refine the ask, and also, though, an important part of this equation is the sale price of the product that is built on this site. So clearly, if a significantly better sale price was achieved than anticipated, then that would alter the viability. But we need to put that side of it to one side, because the negotiations over what we call clawback or the overage agreement, in other words, as a landowner, the County Council will be asking for a share of any enhanced sale price. But after this meeting, if members are in agreement to support it, we can confirm formally to the property side of the County Council that the 106 package has been secured and is reasonable, and that we would request that any negotiations between the developers and our property wing are carried out on the basis of the 106, and that there may need to be more flexibility over price from us as a vendor. But I don't get involved in that, because that is no different from if, say, a private landowner was selling it. We'd be saying the same thing. Okay. And I put any questions on that. So, even though there are some serious viability questions about this, first of all, that gets to the heart of why this site has become stuck. But secondly, the 106 includes mechanisms for review, and there is opportunity within the land transaction process as well for the developers to reflect increase or uncertainty over costs. To anticipate a point that the applicants will going to say is, at the moment, I understand that the overage, in other words, if prices do go up in terms of products sold, is very, very much in the favour of the land vendor by a 80% to 20% ratio, and it may need to be looked at again to allow for the viability gap to be meaningfully addressed in this. But just to restate, and this is my final point, is that this is an allocated and anticipated site. It's already got permission on it. It isn't about the principle. The design is up to modern standards and as an appropriate mix of house types, and that we consider that there are sufficient mechanisms available both through the 106 and activities outside that in terms of the land transaction to enable the developer to secure overall a scheme that will be deliverable. Okay. I think more questions will arise as the debate goes on, but thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much indeed. Members of the committee, we now come to the slot of public speakers. We've got 2 public speaking slots this afternoon. We've got Barry Flux speaking as the local councillor, and Ian Prescott here speaking in support of the application. So Barry, would you like to take the floor? You've got 5 minutes, sir, and 5 minutes only as the local member. We're listening to you.
Thank you, Chair. Residents in Cramlington have been very stoic. For such large applications like this, we have not seen mass objections. It is therefore extremely disappointing to see this stoicism and good faith rewarded with such a disappointing report in front of us today. Reductions in contribution to education, playing pitches, sports pavilion, and a massive drop in the affordable housing compared to the 2017 application. And I'm sure new residents would note with no relish at all the idea of £1 million being clawed back to get from 7.59 million to 8.65 million through their service charges. Roads and roundabouts are a big issue in Cramlington. The link proposed to Langdale Drive has troubled residents for some time, for fear vehicles could be used and that antisocial behaviour would occur. Can it 100% be confirmed, and I think it has been, that this is only a cycle lane? When it is for emergency vehicles, when would it be used? And would also note there's a very good cycle link very close by at Lowther Square, which I think again has puzzled residents as to why we've got this link in here, which would take out parking space for existing residents on Langdale Drive in the numbers near the 40s and 50s, who already have the whammy of a school near to them and to other issues in the area. Elsewhere, residents have been let down in Cramlington through new roundabouts being long overdue or incomplete. There's still no roundabouts at St Nicholas Manor development. The roundabout on Fisher Lane here is still incomplete. Can this committee look at encouraging strong cast iron conditions that certain development thresholds cannot proceed unless roundabouts and roads are completed? And I note on the picture here we have one roundabout on Fisher Lane going to Kilder Avenue, and beg your pardon, on Beacon Lane going to Kilder Avenue and to the Beacon Lane estate, and a further one to the south within the new development. So overall, I note the healthcare provision in the section 106. However, it's disappointing so many other areas have gone backwards in this new application. That's all I have to say, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Does Councillor Flux leave the room, Melanie, or does he stay in the room?
You can stay, it just takes no part and can't vote, but you can stay.
Thank you. So now we have 5 minutes from Ian Prescott speaking in support of the application. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by congratulating Jeff? This is, as he's outlined, a very complex and challenging site, and I don't underestimate the difficulties he's had in putting it into a report and then into a succinct presentation. With Melanie Bullman in the room, I'd also like to thank Melanie for the work she's done in recent weeks on the Section 106 agreement, which again is very complex. What I'd like to just stress here, Keith Morton Barrett have worked on this site for many years trying to find a viable solution to bring it forward. Originally, back in 2006, 2008, we also had Taylor Wimpey on the team. They actually walked away in 2010 because they just thought it was too challenging. The reason why it's challenging is a big section of this site was open casted, as Jeff said, in the late 40s. And the remediation of open cast in those days was nothing like it is at Shotton. There's no Northumberlandia or anything like that on this site. They literally dropped the bigger boulders, the stones and whatnot, into the bottom of the open cast and then just backfilled very loosely. So what you've got is a lot of boulders in the bottom of this site with a lot of air voids and then quite loose soils that have slowly settled over the years above. We, throughout, from sort of getting outline planning in 2008, worked through all the engineering aspects of that. And by 2015, when members in one of these rooms approved the scheme, you know, we'd got a solution, and we got the Section 106 eventually signed in 2017. We thought we could get started, but then NHBC started querying yet again all of our proposals for the remediation of this site. And what we had to do between 2017 and 2020 is go through the remediation in immense detail with NHBC. They've insisted that we actually carried out that remediation work in one part of the site. So we spent 130,000 jointly with Barrett's, actually pressure grouting an area, filling the voids between the stones, then re-engineering the layers above. And then we've sat with weight on that site as if it had houses on it, showing that it didn't settle. So there's been at least a year of sort of pressure testing as well. All of that led to last year NHBC finally agreeing that yes, we did have a solution that they were happy to warrant, and we could proceed with the scheme. But obviously life had moved on in the meantime, so we then sat down with Jeff and Rob back in the last year to talk about viability. Since then, we've gone into an awful lot of detail. We've tendered all of this work. The team that have appraised all our costs have seen all of the tenders. We literally have a team serious, ready to start on Monday on site. You know, that it's been fully tendered, all of that information has been made available. We need to start on Monday because we need to do this pressure grouting and re-engineering of the soils and whatnot when the weather's reasonably decent. If we don't start in the next week or two, we won't be able to start until May next year, and we'll be back in the rounds discussing the viability yet again with new sale prices, new valuations. So it is immensely complicated. Recently we've been chatting to Rob and Jeff about other schemes, and Neil from Barrett's and myself recently appraised the Arcot scheme. And yes, we've reduced our offer, but when I say the adjacent Arcot scheme
which is for 1,600 dwellings. Ours is 715, so nearly 900 less. Their actual Section 106 offer is 5.4 million. Our revised offer is 7.6. So on a scheme about half, the actual Section 106 offer is more. Yes, the affordable housing is less at 8%, but when you take into account both schemes and the cost of that affordable housing, we've got costs of about 16,000 per dwelling, as opposed to Persimmon and Arcott's at 13,900. And when you bear in mind that
Thanks very
we've
much,
got
Ian.
£26 million
Yeah.
of our
Ian,
normal cost
thank
that
you.
they didn't.
Ian,
This is,
thanks.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Chair, just for clarity, I'll put that on.
At the start of that, I didn't know if that was a member of the public, sorry. I didn't know if that was a member of the public speaking or it was an agent working for the developer. Obviously, as it moved on, we realised it, but I would like to know at the start of this meetings if it's the public or it's an employee for the developer. Thank you, Chair.
No, I get that, and an important point. It wasn't there today, you know, I do know the gentleman, obviously he works for a housing company, but yes, we should have, I should have mentioned that at the start.
Sorry, my apologies. I should have said I'm speaking on behalf of Keepmore and Barrett.
And before we get into this, it's been a bugbear of mine that, because Rob Murphy said that this is our land. I don't see where it says on the agenda here that this is NCC land. So I could say, I didn't know this was NCC land. I don't know if I need to declare an interest, whether we all do.
No.
That's just a technicality, and often we never see who the actual landowner is, and that could cause us a problem. I'll shut up so we can get progress,
I think,
but it's...
I think, Rob, we have to ignore the fact that we're the landowners.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to make. And thank you. Is the point is that in the normal way of things, that if we were a joint developer of this site, then it would be clearly laid out that effectively it was the county council making an application for its own development. Here, like very large swathes of the land within the county, we sell pieces of land, and if the developer develops it or not, the deal is there, and if this developer doesn't go ahead, then it will be marketed to someone else. So there's no prejudicial interest there, because it isn't the case that we are granting a planning permission for ourselves. It is granting planning permission to the developer, and we will not own the land once development starts. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Well, with that said, members, we're now at the section where we have the opportunity to ask our planning officers questions about the application. Anyone got questions they wish to raise? Georgina, you're first in line. Georgina Hill.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first is a very quick one. It's obviously major development by any standards, and the number of houses and so on. Cramlington Town Council had no comment. That seems odd. I mean, I know sometimes town councils, you'd look at that and you think, why is the town council not commenting? And then sometimes they'll say, we didn't know, or we weren't alerted at time for our meetings. It'd be good to know just a little bit of background. I mean, it's not obviously comes down to this or anything, but why Cramlington Town Council haven't responded at all?
Through the chair, I don't want to put words into the town council's mouth in any way, but just to recap on the point we made, that this is an existing permission and it's been a very long-standing component of anticipated forward plans under all the different iterations of development plans in the area for a very long time. So the town council will be fully aware this scheme is going ahead, and if they are satisfied that the scheme is broadly as they anticipated, they will have not put a representation in.
Okay.
They were. I can confirm that they were consulted.
Right. Okay. Thanks. The second question, this is my final question. I mean, obviously, the permission's been granted. Doesn't seem anything automatically objective with the types of houses. It's all about the detail and the benefit in the Section 106. In simple terms, in layman's terms, you know, you talk about the scheme's not feasible if it's, you know, given this money for Section 106. A cynic would say, do you mean the profit levels aren't as high as they'd like? I mean, in layman's terms, and obviously if the market goes up and all sorts of things and the price of whatever, so many variables on this, but as things stand, taking the average or whatever criteria has been doing, I presume this is £3 million mark. That doesn't mean if you stuck at the original Section 106, that would they get into the point where they're going to make no money on it. Or is it just that they're not going to make as much money as they'd like?
Yeah, thanks. And that question really gets to the heart of it. Okay. And Jeff has emphasised the point that this buy has not been a case of them saying we can't make enough money on this site and us saying yes and accepting that. There's been, out of all the schemes I've probably ever dealt with in terms of a residential scheme, this is the most probing back and forth examination and review and counter review in terms of viability. The fundamental issue here, and the speaker touched on this, is that when the decision was made and signed between 2017, it stacked up, okay? There was always an awareness that because of that historic open casting of the site, and again, as was mentioned, in the 50s and 60s, we didn't do things like compaction of open cast coal sites. So there's big issues of differential settlement over sites. So what's happening, and to cut across some of the acronyms that we used, the insurance companies who basically offer the warranty on new homes were not happy with the scheme as originally agreed. They said they needed to see invasive land stabilisation works before they would agree to warranty the building. And that has taken a lot of work to get to the stage where they agreed to it, and has loaded lots more costs onto it. Because of that delay, we've also hit the period where, rightfully, and we're not arguing with the merits of this, that because of the climate change issue, that building regulation standards are progressively increasing, so that the assumptions made are now completely non-applicable. What we have tried to do, and this has been the real challenge here, and why it has been fractious sometimes, but there's been a very robust debate, is we've tried to come to an overall agreement on the overall provision of 106 payments, which meets as much as we could negotiate the best contributions for different elements, while still not pushing the overall scheme into a stage which won't happen. Okay. And what we are saying is that at the moment, if nothing else changed, if the house price sale price achieved going forward was as we're assuming now, longer term, this site would potentially be in the negative in terms of profits. Okay. The company is, though, looking at this objectively and saying, actually, though, things will change and we will learn more about this site as we go on, and it is hopeful that sale prices will improve as we go through time. So that's why here there's an upfront acknowledgement in the 106 that this is appropriate now, but we recognise there's still lots of uncertainties on this site, so that's why it has review mechanisms built into it, which work both ways, okay, in our favour and in the developer's favour. So what we've got here, I think, is a reasonable position where the developer, through this mechanism and negotiations with the landowner, should be able to get a scheme that runs through its entire build-out period and stacks up. I suppose the final thing I just need to emphasise is that we absolutely did not take any of this on face value, as perhaps we would have done historically. So there's been a really detailed process of us having a double triangulation of every stage of their figures. And there's been lots of debate back and forth about every assumption made, down to a minute detail about the costs here. So this is a difficult ask. And all I'll say is, this isn't the situation where a developer comes along, says, grant me planning permission, there's no problem in me paying for all these nice add-ons in terms of contributions, and then a few months later coming back and saying, actually, I've done my figures and we can't afford to pay it. The reasons behind the exercise to revalue the entire process are legitimate here. And they are unusual in terms of not every housing site will sit on partially on a former open cast coal site and be looked at in a transition period between fairly fundamental changes in 2 stages of building regulations changes which will straddle the period, okay, that we know about now.
All right, Georgina. Thank you. Councillor Alec Wallace.
Thanks, Chair. Like Georgina, like Councillor Hill, I'm a little concerned. As you've said, Jeff Horseman has worked extensively over a long period with the planner. With a different hat on, I signed a charter with the leader of this council that parish councils will always reply to a consultation. It's in the charter. It's not the most important issue on this application by a mile. But I know, meeting with Rob since he's been employed here, constant allegations are made that the planning department doesn't consult with parish councils. Here's an example of one of the biggest councils, parish councils in Northumberland, not giving us any evidence of which way their residents are thinking on this application. It's a good job I heard the local members speak, otherwise I'd have no indication at all. Very simple question to Mr. Horseman, and then I have another question, if I may, Chair, much more pertinent. I don't imagine you only spoke to the parish council once. Just approximately, without going into detail, how many times over the period of time of this application would you consider you've spoke to them for us to not get a response off them in writing?
Well, no, the situation was that they were consulted on the application, as other consultees are, but as they've chosen not to comment. There was a lot of background information provided with the application, all of which was available online for any member of the public or sort of other consultee to look at. So they were consulted, but they've chosen not to respond.
Thank you. I mean, that is their right not to respond, but it's not within the spirit of the charter. More importantly, I'm concerned with the section 106. Quite rightly, I think you'll put in this review of viability. That's not unusual. It's not new. You've explained that to me personally on other occasions, Rob. What happens, and heaven forbid it should, that this development stalls and it isn't completed? That would prove without a shadow of a doubt that the viability is too much. What happens with that section 106 money then? Can the applicant come back and ask for a review? Does the review work both ways? That's my question.
Yeah, I can answer that. And yeah, the review, there's been an improvement in the art and the science of writing section 106 agreements over the years. And I think, as Jeff mentioned, we've tried to be both pragmatic and flexible on this. So you'll see words like certain things kick in when they get to the damp-proof course level here, and then back up and almost to answer tangentially the point that Councillor Flux made. Here as well, there are very clear prior to occupation requirements on the conditions, and what we're doing differently now is that the problem site that Councillor Flux is referring to was very much the case of the planning was sorted out, and then we started looking at the highways issue. So the developer, one could argue, has not been in a position where they've needed to progress it as quickly as possible, even though we have been pushing them and pushing them. Here, we're approaching this in a new way, and so when you look at what we call the technical approval process, that's where the actual final designs of roundabouts, etc., are agreed. I checked this morning, as of this morning, out of the 86 technical requirements, 74 of them have been closed already and agreed even today. So the rest of them will be sorted out very quickly. And then there are conditions on that the money on the highways needs to be spent before the properties are occupied. Finally, we cannot compel people to complete developments. And so we will be talking, and the 106 will include, they won't pay every bit of the 106 up front. It will be phased as they build out, as they hit certain trigger points. Okay, that is normal practice. And that's needed to be done on this site particularly, because clearly if there's a viability problem, in terms of cash flow, front-loading everything on the assumptions that all the houses are going to be built out causes us further problems and would lead to us having to negotiate down the overall level of contribution. So this has been a mammoth exercise in trying to come up with something which tries and juggles all these different competing pressures.
Thank you. Councillor Dodd.
Yeah, it's not new that building regs change. You know, ever since time began, they've changed.
Yeah.
And I understand that the climate change has probably put an extra bit of pressure on that. However, I'm unfortunate that I've been on the LDF a long time. And I think in our next 10 years, we've got 19,000 houses to
build, and we've got permission for 17,000 that aren't built, and we've seemed to have sat with that for a long time. Is that going to be a problem in the future, considering this? And does this set a precedence over the affordable percentage? Because every developer we see doesn't try to move it up, they're trying to move it down. Remember, as building regs have been going around, we were at 35% at one point, and I think we got down to 15, and it's been 20. We're all over the place on that. So that's my concern, and that's the question, that we're setting a precedence. And do we have an upstream problem with 16,000 or 17,000 already planned houses?
Thanks for that, Councillor. There's a few questions in there. You're correct that building regulations, for a variety of reasons, be they fire safety or whatever, go through a constant change. The difference here is that these changes to do with climate change are so significant that government has effectively taken an approach of phasing them in and giving very clear heads up to the development industry when they are going to start to apply for. So there's a series of known in advance building reg changes. Okay, if this was application for one house, you could say that you could probably get it built and occupied within a few months. Given the scale of large housing sites like this, it is clear that any reasonable take on building rate will see it building out, and because the infrastructure works as well that need to be created, over a period that will definitely straddle these known about changes to building regs. So it's wholly appropriate to factor that into the viability. Okay. Point two was, does this set a precedent? I think this sets a very clear precedent in terms of the level of information and how challenging we will be in terms of viability assessment. I can confirm that this probably represents the most detailed approach we've taken. In the past, we used to, in the past in England, across all local authorities, we used to take less of a level of detail as evidence for this sort of thing. But since particularly the National Planning Policy National Planning Policy Framework came in 2012, there's been more of an emphasis on viability, and I do genuinely think this represents the current highest standard we've done. So it sets a precedent. Okay, the outcome of the process, based on evidence, is X, but actually the process itself sets a very useful precedent. Okay, it's a linked question about the new local plan, because the other big change in local plan is that you've got to be able to demonstrate housing delivery throughout your plan period, and you've got to have looked at plan level viability as well, such that 85% of schemes should be able to meet the contributions. Okay, what that's done, that's informed a real refinement of our approach to affordable housing, where now the local plan sets out a range for the areas that have the highest market profitability, let's call it in simple terms, need to achieve 30% affordable housing, and areas where getting development on the ground is important, but we recognise that the viability won't sustain it, that the new approach will be to aim for a target of, say, 10%. And that's all evidence, that's been the nuts and bolts of going through the examination public and the local plan, where we've been tabling evidence on the different targets, and the development industry has been contesting them, and that's a natural way of things. What I'm saying, though, is our approach now in the new local plan is very evidence-based, and it isn't just based on us having asks that we know that we will never achieve. Because just putting a target in the absence doesn't get you affordable housing built. It has to be backed up by evidence and it's be deliverable. Okay, so it is about squaring that circle. I think that's the phrase I used at the beginning here. This is a site that's been long anticipated for development. It forms part of the plan's anticipated delivered housing through the plan period. And it's been difficult to square because of the viability. It is a component of what you described as our future land supply. It's not over and above that, it is within our anticipated land supply for the local plan. Okay, I think I answered all 3 parts there. If there's anything else, I'll be happy to answer it.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I had a huge number of questions for this application. I was really concerned about the level of reduction in the 106. I like the idea of the viability clauses there, and reassured us that it may go up. The contribution, we've got to look for the value for money for taxpayers here. And Councillor Flux did a very good speech there in support of his residents and his concerns locally. Can we just, Jeff, if you don't mind, get your pen out. So still a couple of points there. Has current Town Council been consulted in relation to this application we're hearing today, or is it a general one which has been going on for some time? And since it went in, we've got the green change in the world. We're all environmentally aware, and this council is leading nationally. Have they changed anything there? We've got electric car charging points to the premise, each house there, fibre to the individual houses as well. Jeff mentioned some reduction there. It's absolutely massive reductions in the 106. And I think stringent timelines have to be given for any kick-in for the 106, because I would hate to think I'm not this particular development. Developers are there to build houses. We all like living in houses and to make some money. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But how do we control the 106 agreements at the different levels? The grounds maintenance, now we're talking about charges. Is that to everybody in that estate? Because I'm dealing with something from 21 years ago in a estate in my ward where they're only charging certain people for grass cut, not everybody. Several developers in there. But the most important thing, I think, is, are we confident this site is going to be safe? Because we've just heard all the doom and gloom here about the rock's been put down there. It's an unstable site. Yes, we live in Northumberland, a fantastic county. And we have got a history of pits out there, other industrial areas. How safe that's going to be? And from personal experience, I'm aware of some land which wasn't very stable, and the builders went and built on there. They are going to do lots more. We heard when they put their spade in the ground, they may find there's other problems there. But what if they find, build some of the houses there? Are they going to leave half an estate there? It is a really difficult one there. But what's so different about this estate to the one just a few feet away where we've built houses already?
Okay, Chair, it's okay. I'll answer some of the wider questions there, and I'll ask Jeff just to confirm that the Town Council was both consulted on the earlier application and explicitly on this one, and some of the detail points. Yeah. The big difference here is the existence, on this site, is the existence of former open cast coal workings. And what we have done here, what the developer has done, isn't just to say we think it's going to be difficult because of problems. They've actually done trial work already at substantial cost, and that's been the basis to which they've negotiated basically the warranty, I say, on these houses. So because of issues like you talked about, where perhaps houses have been built in the past and the NHBC, who do the new homes warranty, have found themselves in a situation where they've had to pay, for significant works to be done on structural matters. they have been pushing the developer really hard on this. And so we now have more information about the actual ground conditions. We've had the results of a trial process to achieve the appropriate levels of ground stability. And then we have, and what the developer's done actually here, hasn't said then, this is the rest of the scheme. They have now got firm contract costs to do that work for the rest of it. So we have more surety than we would do as against a scenario it was a general, we are worried about it. What we have sought to do is, even though we've got lots more information, we have included that provision in the 106, which is recommended, where it can be reviewed, and it can be reviewed both ways. In other words, if it transpires on the evidence that they are making a better, in simple terms, if they're making a better margin, there can be more money available for 106. If there's less, then clearly we have to look at it again. None of this, just to keep restating, hasn't been taken just, on their say-so. We've done a lot of work, and it isn't the case where we've agreed to disagree and we've reached a compromise. Our independent valuers agree completely with the assertions they've made over costs. And there is, everyone is on the same page on that now. And I'll just, restate again that in the past I have done work on former open cast coal sites, and there's a huge difference between building on one which has been restored 10 years ago than there is to one restored 50 years ago, because a progressive compaction is used on new sites that are anticipated for development. And in previous jobs I have, there's housing up on former open cast coal sites, but they were modern sites, and that is the big difference in that, as the applicant tried to say, really what restoration was back in that era was basically just bulldozing the material back into the hole, and that was it. Whereas now you would do progressive compaction of each layer, so there was no variable issues in the future. It is hard to encapsulate, I suppose, to members the amount of detailed back and forth this has been on this one. And in terms of Councillor Dodd's point, it does indeed set a precedent, but it sets a very high evidential bar in terms of what we need in terms of surety to come to you with a difficult decision, saying that in 2017 we thought we were getting X and now we're getting less. So we wanted to make sure that absolutely we were on firm ground, no pun intended, on this. Okay, Jeff, do you want to just confirm that the Town Council was consulted on this new application?
Yeah, I think just on that, and just to respond to some of the other questions that were raised as well. In terms of the Town Council, yes, they were consulted on this latest sort of application. As I say, the previous application was the one that I mentioned that was approved in 2017. So it is a number of years ago when we had the original application that, as I say, was approved in 2017. So as I say, what we're looking at now is obviously this revised proposal, and yes, the Town Council were consulted on this revised application when it was sort of submitted sort of earlier this year. In terms of the other issues, you asked a question, Councillor Stewart, around kind of climate change and what measures were being sort of put in place sort of around that. As I said, we obviously mentioned the account that's been taken of obviously the dwelling specification changes under Part L, the building regulations, and the future home standard from 2025. In addition to that, there are still some Section 106 contributions that are sort of proposed around promoting sort of CO2 reduction. Obviously, in terms of the Council's climate change strategy, one of the major areas where we need to secure improvement is around trying to get people out of their cars and into sort of walking, cycling, using kind of public transport and alternative, more sustainable modes of transport. And as I say, there are still proposals in the Section 106 agreement, £250,000 for basically travel plan measures of one sort or another, and then an additional £194,000 to fund the salary of a travel plan coordinator to basically facilitate sort of this kind of sort of work. That there are also monies built into the cost of the scheme around provision of PV panels, solar PV panels to sort of dwellings. Now those won't be able to meet all of the sort of energy needs of dwellings. It's likely there'll need to be other sort of measures under Future Homes Part L that would need to be considered as well. Likewise, from the landscaping point of view, obviously there's lots of there's reference in the recent changes to the National Planning Policy Framework about the importance of trees in terms of mitigating sort of climate sort of change in terms of carbon capture and what have you. And again, there are proposals as part of the sort of landscaping for the site to retain large numbers of existing trees, hedgerows, as well as providing sort of new planting for the scheme. Coming on to the question around kind of the maintenance sort of charges. That's really a question that's had to be confronted because of the viability sort of gap that we find ourselves with. As I say, it's not uncommon on large housing developments such as this to have a situation after the development is finished for essentially common open space areas to be handed over to a private management company who will then levy charges on the owners of the various properties on the estate to cover the ongoing sort of maintenance. So that essentially is the proposal here in terms of a couple of areas where there would be suds ponds on the site and areas, common informal open space areas. The maintenance proposals don't relate to the formal sports facilities on the site. You may have seen from the report that there are proposals for a couple of grass sort of pitches, sports pitches on the sort of western edge of the site, as well as a multi-use games area and a sports pavilion. And there is specific provision for some maintenance monies for those, £111,000 still in the Section 106 agreement, and that doesn't change from the previous sort of Section sort of 106 agreement for the previous sort of scheme. In terms of, you mentioned kind of safety concerns around, as I say, the ground conditions and contamination. As I say, there were various reports submitted with the application, as there were with the previous application, around site investigation works that have been sort of undertaken. As with the previous application, we've consulted again with this current application. We've consulted again with the Coal Authority and with our public protection team, with the Environment Agency as well, and none of those consultees have raised any objections to the scheme subject to various conditions being attached, which are essentially a repeat of what was attached to the previous sort of approval. Obviously, Rob's touched upon, as I say, the issues, the differences to the adjoining site to the south. I think really just to add to what Rob has said, we do need to look at each site on its particular merits. There are differences in terms of ground conditions, as Rob mentioned, between this particular site and then the Persimmon Bellway site to the south. There are other factors that have a bearing on viability as well. Obviously, the site to the south is a much larger scheme. As I say, it's 1,600 sort of dwellings as opposed to sort of 715 on this particular site. There are also differences in terms of sort of land sort of costs as well. My understanding is with the site to the south that essentially the developer there has owned that site for many decades. I think they were originally Leach Homes, who were part of the original kind of joint venture for kind of Cramlington and Newtown. So they've held that site for a number of decades, which is different, as I say, to the situation that Barrett and Keepmoat find themselves in, where they're a relatively recent sort of arrival on the scene, as it were, compared to, as I say, the developers to the south. But yeah, as I say, it is a matter of there being different influences on viability, and there are clear differences between the site to the south and this site.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Ian Hutchinson, you have a question, sir?
I had a few actually, but quite a few have been answered. I think, one of my main worries was the proposed clawback on 106. Great if there's a clawback, but the worry is if there's another application comes in because things go downhill again after the next 2-3 years. When I first read the report, I was disappointed to think that they got permission in 2017 and are now applying for an amendment of the conditions in 2021. But it's been good to hear the reason for that. I understand that now. The one, just minor things, because things have been answered, such as the clawback, the setting of precedents, etc. Minor things like the summary responses, objections. One of the last paragraphs in the second, one of the last sentences in the second paragraph, ownership/maintenance of the existing strip of land between Kielder Avenue and the application site to be resolved. Is that resolved, or would that be resolved? The way this reads, it's got nothing to do with this particular site.
Yeah, my understanding is that that would be resolved as part of the scheme going forward. As I say, there are various kind of formal and informal kind of footpath routes across the site from the kind of Beacon Hill estate to the kind of south and the west. So my understanding was that was a query in relation to those. As I say, where there are formal footpath routes, those are sort of kind of safeguarded through a condition on a suggested condition in your report. In terms of informal routes, that's something that obviously would need to be looked at in terms of the would need to be looked at in terms of the layout. And as I say, I think our view generally is that even if some informal routes disappear, as I say, the layout generally is a good permeable layout. It does provide for good connections, kind of north, south, sort of east, west. I think those issues have been addressed, as I say, through the layout and through conditions that we're suggesting.
This is more the ownership and maintenance of this particular strip of land, though, not a right-of-way or a cycleway or anything like that.
We just need to steer clear of the ownership issue on this one, I think, Councillor, in that it's irrespective of who owns what at what time. If there are ownership problems, then those will have to be addressed by a developer. And on other sites, historically, permissions sometimes get granted that can't be implemented if the landowner says no. But we can't best guess landowner intentions at this stage, I'd say. But the point that I suppose Jeff's making is that irrespective of what's on the ground at the moment, I understand this will be a big change, is what Jeff was actually getting at was that the new design addresses an appropriate density of footpaths and public walking and cycling points. So if it gets built out in the anticipated way, that will address the issues. Okay, thank you.
May I have another?
Yes, we're not quite finished yet. One last question? Or?
Well, there's a couple actually. One's a very small one, but a minor one. The other one is the owners of the land have been working very closely with the developers. The owners being, as I've discovered, the County Council. Do you think that's slightly muddied the waters a little bit? Because it's a difficult thing to be the planners, and not just the planners but the owners as well of it, and working with the developers to try and get the best outcome. Is the land already sold? Has money changed places?
Okay, can I just, thank you. And that's a really good, useful question. And just to be absolutely clear, the planning functions of this department come under what we call the local planning authority, and it's done that way for a particular reason, in that there should be no interplay between executive and non-executive functions. So the decisions will go out in my name eventually, so after we've said it's the right decisions. And just to be clear, we have pushed really hard on this, and sometimes we push hard and we don't get the agreement, and unfortunately I can think of an example, and it doesn't represent, I suppose, what you'd say, what the public might think is good joining up. We had an application which talked about viability issues in the same way. That was from Ascent Homes, who were linked to the developer, that we refused at committee. So we are perfectly clear with all developers that there's no special treatment here. And I would like to think that if the applicant spoke again, he would say that we have pushed them extremely robustly on this and there's been no quarter given.
Thank you, Rob. That's really good to hear. One very small final one, which is just for clarity. This proposed cycleway walkway, which was going to be for emergency vehicles, is it for emergency vehicles or not?
Yes, potentially it could be used by emergency vehicles, but I think it's highly unlikely that that situation would arise. It would only need to be used essentially if sort of Beacon Lane, for whatever reason, became blocked and there needs to be access to the site. And the likelihood of it being used decreases as well as the development progresses, because as I mentioned in my sort of presentation, there is a proposal kind of longer term to have a through route through the southwest sector site. So you come in through Beacon Lane and you'll be able to go right through the site, through the Persimmon Bellway site, and come out on the roundabout that's now been built at Fisher Lane. So that would obviously provide a second way into the site as well as Beacon Lane in the longer term. I think around about, I think it's about 800 dwellings have to be built on the Persimmon sort of land, Persimmon Bellway land to the south before that link sort of comes sort of through. So it's not quite there yet. So I think yes, it's there as this footpath cycleway link from the site to Langdale Drive is there on the plans, and yes, theoretically it's there for use by the emergency services if required. But I think it's likely to be. Well, it's going to be very unlikely that it would need to be used for those purposes, in my opinion.
Thank you.
My concern...
Councillor Ball, your question.
Sorry?
Councillor Ball now, yeah. You know, I think debate about the issue you're raising can come up when we're debating the issue, but it's just questions at this point. Councillor Ball.
Can I just have some clarity on the private management company mentioned in 2.16? Who will own this company? Is it the home builder? And because if they're collecting the service charges till the end of time, but they're not contributing it at the start for the maintenance costs, it just seems we're getting a vast reduction up front and it's been passed on to the future dwellers of these properties. So who will own the private management company? Is it the home builder?
Well, as I say, the usual situation, it's a standalone sort of company, so it's not owned. It's not in the ownership of the house builder or house builders in this instance. So essentially, the way this normally sort of works is that once the development's nearing sort of completion, essentially these kind of common open space areas are essentially passed by the house builder into the ownership of this private sort of management company, and obviously as properties are sold, as the development progresses, there'll be clauses written into the sale agreements that obviously residents are responsible for covering the maintenance sort of costs, and it's normally a service charge that's levied on an annual sort of basis, and will be paid obviously longer term to this private sort of management company, who will then maintain the common areas on behalf of the residents. It's not an unusual sort of arrangement, because nowadays the county council will not adopt nor parish councils often will not adopt these common sort of open space areas. It is down to the residents who primarily benefit from them, who live on these new estates, to cover the costs of their long-term maintenance.
It's just with regards to the private management company, if it's an arm's length organisation of the home builder, then they're going to claw back money long-term from this continued maintenance cost, but they're not actually putting anything, well, very little compared to what was actually requested at the start. It's vastly reduced.
Yeah, but that isn't the case. As I say, it is a standalone company, and as I say, the expectation will be that obviously they're only levying sort of charges that are required to cover the sort of costs of whatever maintenance needs to be undertaken on these areas on a kind of annual basis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got Councillor Jeffrey, and then I've got Councillor Richard Dodd wants a second question.
Thanks, Chair. And just to go back to the previous question, what happens is that the builders own, or the operators of the company, they are shareholders of the company until all the houses are sold, and then all of the people who own the houses own the company. Now, some of these things can be turn out very difficult, but the arrangement is that presumably the people can get together and sack the company. You know, they own it, so... But anyway, what I wanted to ask was, is it the whole site in this unstable condition, or is it just particular bits of it? It's got on the plan here a village green. Now, a lot of us know that that's actually a thing. If you see what I mean, it is something in law. Is this going to be something in law? And if it is, then that's going to have to be the responsibility of the town council, as far as my memory serves. I don't think a private company can have a village green. And could you indicate where the suds ponds are going to be? I think I can see 2, but I don't see any of the rest of them. And you might find that people who live quite a distance from those suds ponds are saying, why should I be paying a service charge for something that I can't even see? And the last question is, how long is it going to take to build it?
Okay. Yeah, okay. I'll answer part of those questions. The issue of the suds ponds and what we call the village green are a reflection, and this has been changing over the years, that we need to have proper approaches both to sustainable drainage and the fact that I think it's fair to say that when you look at many historic housing estates in this country, particularly some of the ones done in the 1980s, that the only elements of public space were often grass verges or bits they couldn't fit houses on, that just ended up being dog toilets. So the use of the term village green is a design concept where we were pushing them to incorporate into the design a more organic feel, where if this had been a historical place, it would have natural bits of open space in there that could be used for village events and things like that. So this is very much a design concept we've been trying to push on this and other new schemes. In terms of people contributing to it, there won't be much of discretion because all the homeowners will contribute to it, because actually they can all use the exercise facilities that those open spaces offer and the amenity value they have, but also though the SUDS approach, effectively, even if you're some distance from it, it is still managing the water on the housing site, and that helps you make sure that your house is insurable, that there's a proper scheme in place. So lots of these new things we keep loading on to designs in terms of contributions, let's call them in the wider sense, or things we negotiate, have to be secured, and we secure them by condition, by 106, or by the use of the eventual residents paying part of this. Because what has changed in that, back in the past, areas of open space, like a little park that was promoted for, the public sector took them all on and managed them. And it's the same as roads now. We only take on board what we've got to now because we would be paying for the costs in perpetuity via the public purse via a different route. And this is why you see a lot of debate, and the point that Councillor Flux made about delays to highway works being rolled out. Because the big point that we are pushing for now, for example, is that we don't adopt public highway until we know we are inheriting something which has been built properly. And that back and forth takes a lot of work. And that's why I try to emphasise that on this one, I talked to our new highways manager who said this one is 90% there in agreement before we hit here. And that's what we should be doing every time now, is getting the designs upfront agreed, so there isn't the delays that some of the residents have experienced on other roundabouts in the area. So all these things, Jeff, are elements of how we work under the new systems, and us being really clear that things are going to be secured by, say, by conditions, by legal agreements, or by different funding routes. That there should be nothing which is waiting to be sorted out in the future, and that no one knows who's going to be looking after it. Okay?
And his question about building out, what sort of timescale?
Sorry, Chair, that was all very eloquent, but it didn't answer any of my questions. So,
yeah,
specifics, yeah. So obviously the first question was around which parts of the site, or is it all of the site that's affected by the abnormal ground conditions? It's part of the site. I've got a slide, I'll just get to that. So you've got a plan there which shows so the areas outlined in red essentially are the areas that have been affected by former sort of open cast sort of mining. So
could I just, sorry Chair, could I just interrupt there a second? So why don't we redesign the estate so the green space is where the unstable land is, and shift the houses that are on the unstable land, on the land that can actually take the weight, and therefore we'll not have to, we'll not have to lose any money.
well, as I say, it's a revision of, as I say, a previous sort of scheme. See, I don't know, as I say, whether that's been sort of considered. As I say, obviously we've been asked to consider a particular proposal. There may be reasons why, as I say, the site was laid out in the first place the way it is. In terms of obviously the suds ponds, for example, again, where those are, they are.
No, I'm not allowed to speak.
You're not allowed to speak. You're not. Ian, could you please stop? Ian, could you please stop? Ian. Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to answer the question in a just slightly different way what Jeff's answering it, is that the site, to get it to work, you can't just put those as the public open space areas, because the total effect of the scheme isn't just as simple as looking at those red lines there. There'll be consequential implications for the rest of the site where those areas need to be addressed if the entire site's going to be developed. If it was a very, very large site and the areas of open space could be completely separated significantly from the housing, then it may be possible. But on that one, it would effectively sterilise so much of the site, it wouldn't give you a scheme that was worth building to get the numbers on.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. What I'm saying is I realise you can't mitigate all of it, but you might be able to mitigate some of it. Does it matter where the big green space is?
It's the bottom line here, right, and this gets to the heart of what started off this problem and why we've been talking to the developers, is that the NHBC would not insure this site. They don't look at individual houses, they look at the scheme, okay, and they needed to be sure that the entire site was being resolved.
Well, there you are, thank you,
Yeah.
you've answered the question.
Okay, thank you.
And can we not, therefore, if that isn't actually
going to be a village green, can we make sure we call it something else? Because otherwise, as I say, it's a legal entity.
Sorry, what I would try, and perhaps I didn't say it explicitly enough, Jeff, is that it's a design term that we're not saying it's going to become a village green from a statutory sense. So maybe we could call it the heart
Recreation area.
The heart of the village or something like
Well,
that.
that's fine. That's absolutely fine. So thank you for that.
Right. Richard Dodd, you had a little additional
Very brief.
question?
It's probably me, yourself, maybe Councillor Lang, and I'm not sure if Councillor Flux can remember that on a site at the very top corner of this map, there was a huge issue about, was it radon gas? And they had to put gas stations in to monitor. I mean, is that the next card that's coming, or is it not an issue on this site? I'm just asking out of historical knowledge.
Yeah, I can answer that one. In Northumberland, the biggest issue isn't radon, it's stithe gas, which is mine gas. And we work very carefully with our public protection team, and the design for new build incorporates appropriate mitigation if it's required. Obviously, it's expensive to put in, so we only put it in where it's necessary. Public protection are very, very firm on this, to the extent where we do have some examples in the county where houses have been built without incorporating that and the required provisions, and that could be a retrospective works needed, which we are looking through the enforcement process to follow up. So we take it very seriously, and they will have looked at this site with that in mind. Okay, I can just confirm there aren't any objections remaining after the design requirements, are there now, Jeff?
What in terms of ground conditions? No, as I said earlier, as I say, there are no objections from any of the kind of statutory consultees, NCC, Public Protection, Coal Authority, Environment Agency, around kind of ground conditions.
Yeah, and just very quickly, again to answer Jeff's question again, is that this is one of the reasons why the NHBC wanted the former open casting area to be treated properly, so there was no risk of other stuff happening or ground collapses. This has been looked at on a fully integrated basis, and just to finish off all these sort of lines of debate, is it has been a challenging process to come to this position, but we now have a scheme which I think addresses all the points you've made and concerns, and we have secured, I think, is the maximum feasible amount of Section 106 contributions on that basis. That still gives you a scheme that can happen. Okay.
Thank you. Malcolm Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions, basically, I think. Jeff, I think I'm maybe the only member here that, and you've used the term extensively tonight, I don't know what partel means. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so these are partel is the part of the building regulations that relates to essentially CO2 reduction measures, energy efficiency of sort of dwellings. So essentially, yeah, it covers that area. So the changes that are coming in, well, the first phase of changes, which essentially come in from next year, around well, placing more stringent standards in terms of energy efficiency, so they'll have to be much higher levels of insulation, for example, in terms of the specification of new dwellings. Obviously, we're getting beyond planning here into the detail of building regulations, but yes, that's essentially what they cover, and obviously related. Also in terms of the future homes, they're the kind of next stage of that 2025 onwards, around obviously the means of providing heat and hot water to dwellings that will have to sort of change.
Thank you. I didn't know what you were referring to when you said it. Is there only one way in and one way out of that site at the moment? Now, I'm asking you with reference to some of the conditions, 31, 32, 33 especially, where you've got implementation timetables listed for highways. I'm presuming what we're looking at here is we're going to get the highways sorted before the main build commences, or?
Yeah, obviously those conditions relate to the kind of upgrading works to Beacon Lane. So that's essentially the main access into the site from the north. So obviously you've got the existing roundabout. Sort of here, you come down Beacon Lane, which is essentially a sort of rural farm access at the moment, but that will have to be upgraded, Beacon Lane. So those conditions that you mentioned relate to those upgrading works, and as Rob mentioned earlier, there is already a lot of detail that's been agreed in terms of those upgrading works, and the reason why that has happened, because obviously this is a revision of a scheme that already has permission. So I mentioned earlier in my presentation that as I say, and I think this is mentioned in the report as well, that all the pre-commencement conditions on the original permission have already been discharged, and that included pre-commencement conditions around the highway improvement works to Beacon Lane. So that's why they've got to such an advanced sort of stage with our highways sort of colleagues on that. So those details have already been approved. So yes, as things stand at the moment, initially the only access will be from Beacon Lane, although it will be improved within those timescales that I mentioned in the conditions, in accordance with the details that have already been approved. Obviously, there'll be a highways technical approval process to be gone through as well, but as we've said, that's almost there because of the work that's already been sort of done. And then longer term, just go to another slide. Yeah, so also just in terms of the wider context, is it, again, just going back to my presentation, so you've got So you've got Beacon Lane sort of here, but longer term you'll also be able to basically access the site from Fisher Lane to the southwest as well. Obviously the roundabout's already gone in, which is being used at the moment just to access the Persimmon and Bellway site. Obviously they've built some of these areas here You've probably seen if you've been down there. But eventually you will have a through route. So I'm just following here, which takes you right through the entire site.
I'm just thinking there's a hell of a lot of deliveries to come in that single route before you get to that stage.
Yeah, I think there is a condition on the Persimmon and Bellway permission. I think it's about 800 dwellings that they're allowed to build before they have to provide that full sort of link all the way through, which will then connect with obviously the layout for this scheme and the Beacon Lane.
Obviously, just in reference to the local members' concerns as well of what's happened historically. A very quick question. The only consultee response which was adverse really was the county ecologist, and residents have mentioned similar sort of things. But reading the report, there's several mentions of remedial works to be done along those lines. Have our ecologists read this updated report? Have they made another response? I mean, they seem to have been taken care of, the concerns which have been mentioned.
Yeah, later on in the report, in the section in the appraisal that deals with ecology, I make reference to, yes, there were further discussions with our ecologist following on from their kind of formal comments, and essentially what was agreed with them was that the various issues that they'd raised could be dealt with through conditions, and obviously the other issue they'd raised was around obviously the wider kind of coastal mitigation, and as say the applicant has agreed to fund the coastal mitigation contribution in full as part of the Section 106 agreement. So that isn't proposed for reduction. Obviously that's a new contribution because it wasn't asked for previously in 2017, because that was before we were really gearing up with the coastal mitigations. That has been provided for. The other issue around ecology with this site is that the most sensitive parts of the southwest sector are not this site. It's more the Persimmon Bellway area to the south, because the land to the south of the Persimmon Bellway area, this area down here where you've got the Orchard Hall Golf Club, parts of that are designated as a site of special scientific interest, or SSSI for short. But essentially there are already provisions in place through conditions on the Persimmon and Bellway scheme around management of the impacts of the whole development of the southwest sector on the SSSI. And the reason we've done that is because obviously those parts of the site are more, that there are likely to be more effects from the Persimmon Bellway scheme on the SSSI than there are from the Barrett Keaton Road scheme, just because of its great closer proximity. But the other issue you've got as well is that Persimmon and Bellway actually own a large part of the SSSI site, so they're in a position to actually manage that sort of land in a way that minimises kind of impact as well, which obviously Barrett and Keaton Road aren't, because they don't have any ownership in respect of that part of the site.
Right. Fair enough. And my last question, probably to Rob, when we do this, when we get to the review mechanism, is that a one-way street? I mean, I think some members have kind of asked that question anyway.
It's the review mechanism can go up or down in our favour or the developer's favour. I think it's fair to say that the developer is strongly of the opinion, to put it politely, that we've geared it very much in our favour at the moment. But we will look at fine-tuning it so it's realistic and proportionate, and it gives the ability, to go up or down on, in terms of the contributions of review. It's what we wanted to do was to be really clear today that this is the information we've got at the moment. There's been lots of work done, but there will probably need to be further reviews, rather than saying to you it's all sorted and then you thinking that it was never going to change. There are mechanisms for change already built into it, so I should be really clear about that. Yeah.
Thank you. Martin Swinbank.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick ones. Obviously, this site hasn't been built out, and yet there's building going on further to the south of the site. So my question, firstly, is if this site doesn't get built out, are there connectivity issues for sustainable travel with Cramlington Town Centre if this wasn't to go ahead? And the second question is regarding condition, or proposed condition 26, which is to do with renewable energy. So it says a scheme including a programme for implementation for the inclusion of energy from renewable energy sources has been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. Obviously, not to go ahead until that's been agreed. But that seems quite weak to me. I don't know what you would think in terms of the expectation of what will be delivered. It seems to me one house could have solar panels on and the rest may not.
I'll answer your last question, then I'll go invite Jeff in to answer your first question. This is to give flexibility in terms of how we look at this, because clearly the markets for renewable energy or sustainable construction equipment is changing rapidly, and particularly when we hit that big change, which makes this site complex, is that this site will straddle the need for not to have gas-fired central heating it. We will need to see what they come forward with as a complete package, and this is intended for us to give us flexibility to try and secure the best outcome in line with what's available at the time. So it's very much aimed at enabling us to push it, and it won't be the case of, and what these conditions actually require, just to be clear, is that when we reserve matters, it will be in the form of effectively another planning application, a discharge of condition application. So that will come in, and we will consult then with our renewable energy, our climate change team or whoever on that basis. So it's a way of doing it robustly. It isn't the case of they can just put a letter in saying we're going to do this, and we write back and say yes. It becomes a formalised process of review and challenge based on policy at the time as well. Okay. Jeff, do you want to answer the first part of the question?
Yes, and in terms of the connectivity of the site to the town centre, if I just come back to the kind of wider kind of context of the southwest sector site, yes, clearly there are advantages in both schemes, both the current scheme that's under construction to the south and this current scheme progressing, because if this proposed scheme does progress as well as the southern scheme, that's clearly going to bring benefits in terms of providing a through route across the site from Fisher Lane to sort of Beacon Lane, and obviously that opens up the possibility of having a through route, being able to divert kind of bus routes, for example. Obviously at the moment the bus services that kind of past the site on Fisher Lane, you've got the express services that kind of connect the site to Crampton Town Centre, Newcastle, Blythe, Ashington. So essentially, yes, there will be benefits if you've got a through route and possibly being able to reroute those services through the site. So yes, that's clearly advantageous if this site weren't to progress for whatever reason, and we just essentially left with the coloured area on this sort of plan. Yes, the connectivity isn't so good, but there is still connectivity provided for. So, for example, in terms of bus connections, in terms of putting the new roundabout in here on Fisher Lane, there is provision that's been made for new bus stops on Fisher Lane to the north of the roundabout to basically connect the existing Persimmon Bellway site into, as I say, the existing bus routes that use Fisher Lane, and those are very frequent bus routes. There's a number of services, express services that as you can get to those destinations I mentioned, Newcastle, Cramlington Town Centre, Blythe, Ashington, from services that already use Fisher Lane. In terms of routes for pedestrians and cyclists, again, they're much better if this scheme progresses than if it's just the Persimmon and Bellway scheme, because essentially then yes, you've either got to go up Fisher Lane and then come down, as I say, into Cramlington Town Centre from this way. There is provision for a link to improve. This is an existing sort of bridleway that basically runs from the Persimmon Bellway site. There's a footbridge across the sort of East Coast main line, and then from there you can get obviously into the town centre sort of relatively easy. There are links as well obviously, again, if this scheme didn't go ahead, you can still get from the Persimmon Bellway site via Beacon Lane up to which is public right-of-way, up to the northern boundary of the site. And I showed you some photographs at the start showing there's an existing footpath cycleway at the north of the site. So there are still some connections there, if this scheme doesn't go ahead, but it would be much better, as I say, with a comprehensive scheme that sees the whole of the southwest sector redeveloped.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeff. Any more questions, ladies and gentlemen, from members to the officers this afternoon? We've had a very thorough question session, which I think our officers have responded well to. If there are no questions, would someone like to move a resolution, please? Richard Dodd. As it is.
Chair, would it be useful perhaps for Jeff just to read it out, given that it was amended from the report, just to remind members?
Okay. As it is, Jeff.
Yes.
Amended.
Yeah, so just to reiterate the presentation. So the recommendation essentially is that this application be granted permission subject to the conditions contained within your report, with the minor amendments to conditions 4, 10, 11, 12 and 23 as updated in my presentation earlier, and also the applicant entering into a section 106 agreement to secure the affordable housing and other contributions highlighted in your report, with the detail of a viability review mechanism regarding abnormal foundations and future homes costs to be determined by the Director of Planning in conjunction with the Chair of Strategic Planning Committee.
Thank you. Happy with that, Councillor Dodd? Is it seconded?
I'll second it.
Councillor Reid. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're open for debate. Councillor Hill.
Okay. Well, I'm struggling with this one. I don't know if anyone can help me. I might come down on not being sure, which would be an abstention. The problem I have with Section 106 agreements is often we have a planning application and you're weighing up things. You might be weighing up, does the benefit, that old one, does the benefit outweigh the harm, etc. And then we have an aspect of it is a Section 106 agreement, and they're giving a little bit to coastal fund or whatever, a little bit here or there. The problem for me is that the whole application really comes down to the Section 106 agreement, and what you're being asked to do is put faith in the officers and their negotiation, and I've no reason not to have faith, and it's no comment on that whatsoever. It's more about making an informed decision and discharging your own duty. That's the problem I have, and I think as a general point, and it's difficult when it's negotiation because you can't do a report really on how a negotiation went and sitting in a room with somebody and going back and forth. I don't know if it is possible with applications to get more details of Section 106. It would be useful. I certainly would find it useful to have a session on 106 agreements. I mean, I know back in 2013 there was a limited assurance from an audit about Section 106. It's an area which is ripe for problems, ripe for a lot of benefits. So that's where I'm struggling.
Yes.
I know we're not in the questions, but can I just off one thing? And I'd just like to offer reassurance that you're right. An audit report was done on the way we did 106 as this authority, and it had a number of recommendations in there to how to improve the process and for safeguards and to address what we call, single points of failure, all those things. We have been through that process. I've implemented all the recommended changes, and those have been signed off now. So the issues like using independent verification, all those issues we have put into place now, where they weren't all there previously. So all I can say, Georgina, is that this isn't just making it up on the spur. This morning I sent an email to the team who'd worked to make all the changes to congratulate them on all the good work they'd done to change the entire 106 process. So that's why you see things like an annual report, and actually there's now a 106 brief update on every agenda, and all the internal quality assurance systems have all been implemented. So that audit has now been signed off as being implemented and complete. And it's got a green light now. And we've carried out the negotiations in line with the new system. Okay.
Just to say, I've no reason that hasn't happened. It would just be with anyone, and I know Section 106 is particularly expertise of yourself. It was just the point about we could have more of a session, maybe a training session or something, and it was also just about, because it all comes down to Section 106, you're being asked, and I'd say this is literally, talk about anyone on the planet, if you're being asked to leap of faith, the assurances that you've got to say, which I'm sure it's been very detailed and back and forth, and it's probably very reasonable, and it's and all the factors and challenges appeal and everything, but it's just that leap of faith, because you know, to make an informed decision, because you're just saying I'm putting faith in a process that's happened, really.
All I'll say as well is that government has recognised that this is controversial up and down the country, and it's uncertain from a local resident perspective to whether it's fully meeting a reasonable ask, and from the development industry that we are over asking. So what's been done, and I can also confirm this to back up the audit approach, is that as part of the local plan, a lot of that was about looking at what we were going to ask for contributions for, whether those were justified, whether they were financially appropriate or not, and the inspector has concluded in their initial findings that our approach is reasonable, proportionate and justified, and isn't either under, because if it under asks, you can't effectively deliver the other parts of the approach you're trying to secure, say on drainage or climate change or whatever, and that the approach from the new local plan onwards has been fully checked out. So it's been looked at independently, well, it's been looked at from an audit perspective internally and externally by central government. I do recognise there's probably opportune to have a session on Section 106, and I have, in my response to Gordon Castle, who's leading on the review of LACs and SPCs, etc., I have suggested that we have a regular update and training slot as part of the planning committee cycle, not just as part of induction training. And 106s and how we do highway evaluations will be up there in terms of what I hear from members all the time.
Just one final quick point, and obviously on that is tapping into the members' knowledge as well about, because, you know, I don't know about everyone else, I presume, but I'd have a whole list of schemes, whether it's highway improvement or play parks or whatever, that I'd like to see in my ward, and it's just tapping into the knowledge that the local members have for those local improvements and what's needed.
Because we've often said that, you know, we've got a lot of little local schemes that we'd like to see come forward, but so often they don't get into the planning process. And I think you're right that, you know, things that the village or the town needs, the local member needs, but sometimes the planning officer doesn't, and it's getting that local input in there that would, you know, benefit the community. Councillor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Chair. We had a long meeting, the last strategic meeting we had, it was a very complicated meeting. And I thought that would be as complicated as it gets, but I think this one's just about as complicated in a different sort of a way, mind. You know, and as I said before, hearing what's gone on between the lines, it's confirmed to me I'm going to support this. I've been both ways. I was going to go against it, I've been for it, all sorts, but after hearing what's been said, I'm going to go with the scheme. I just hope it comes up. I'm concerned about 106 as well. I just hope it comes up and works out for everyone, for the developer, the landowner, the potential residents as well. If I may, very small thing, but I mentioned about the cycleway before, cycleway, walkway, and potential emergency vehicles. I love watching police camera action, and the number of times I have seen young kids who've stolen cars. I'm not saying that happens in Cramlington, mind at all, by no means. who have stolen cars and they find some way to get away from the police by going down some sort of cycleway. Well, if this is going to be a cycleway, fair enough, it's narrow enough and that won't happen. But if it's going to be for emergency vehicles as well, I would imagine there'll be posts that will flop down so they can just drive through them. So that's my concern about that, for the safety of residents. And I wouldn't like to think that that was going to be a way for emergency vehicles, even be it temporary. Thank you, Chair.
No point made. Councillor Ball.
I'm really disappointed in the reduction in the affordable homes. I think it's quite a jump from 143 units down to 57, and especially in the times that we see ourselves in, the home builders, obviously they're worried, but I think it's too much of a jump from 143 down to 57, and personally, I think it's quite disgusting that they've come back with that figure. And also, we're just seeing reduction, primary education, reduction, secondary education, reduction. But we're getting more people. The amount of houses that have been built in Cramlington, we need some kind of investment in education in that area. And as I say, the affordable housing thing for me, it's a massive issue because people from Cramlington need to be able to afford to live in Cramlington. And if they can't, they're being pushed out of other areas, and it's not good enough. So I've got major concerns on that. Thank you.
Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. Last month we passed an application for a giga plant, which is 6 miles from this proposed site. There's a railway station in Cramlington. There's a railway station at Bedlington Station. This is a great opportunity to get traffic off the road. It's 6 miles. They can get on the bike and get to Camas. Mind, I'd rather have seen 715 houses built in Camas, but I'll settle for Cramlington, Chair. Let's get them built and let's get local people into those houses.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Chair, I mean, you know, you get first sight of this application and you look at the reductions that's been suggested and you rail against it, you know. All of us would have, I would presume. But then you look a bit deeper, and like a lot of things in life, where there's a problem that hasn't been fixed for a long time, and this is over 20 years this has been designated for housing, there's reasons for it. Now, to get over those reasons takes give and take. It takes getting out of entrenched positions and trying something new. And I think that's what we've done here. Now, I can see some benefits to this new way of working. I can see some drawbacks as well. But I'm willing to give it a chance. I'm willing to see if it does what it says on the box. I'm even willing to give it the 4 years before it comes up or whatever. And that's when I'll make a decision on whether that particular piece of this new way of thinking has worked. But at the moment, I'm willing to give it the chance.
Thank you. Councillor Judy Foster.
Thanks, Chair. Like colleagues, when I first read this report, I was open to be swayed by the committee, by what was said, and that has happened. But my first instinct was, here's another one, trying to reduce down the affordable housing, because we are seeing this time and time again. And I felt like making a stand on this occasion, because we need to, because developers are doing it far too often. And again, when I saw about the reduction of primary education contribution, one of the biggest things you see on social media, for instance, is more houses, but they're not investing in our schools, they're not investing in our healthcare. So I was welcome to see the extra bit about the new healthcare contribution. But it's a big thing for residents. You know, our schools have just gone through a very difficult period with COVID, where children are behind. And the amount they're getting to support the children getting back up to where they were from government isn't enough. And our schools will struggle to get the children back with the finances they've got. So for 106 agreements to have that financial information in there and to be able to help our schools is absolutely brilliant. But then to see it reduced, it kind of feels like a kick in the teeth, particularly at this time. But I have to say, the supporting speaker has probably given me the most informative 5 minutes I've ever heard from a supporting speaker. And I've heard quite a few. The information he provided was really absolutely pertinent to this application. It's probably, like I said, it's been the most informative information I've ever had on an application that really gives me an in-depth idea as to what has actually been going on. So I'm not happy with the reductions. I'll never be happy with these reductions. And I really do hope that something happens in the future to bring these figures back up. But I think with what has had to happen with, I can't remember the initials that were used, but an organisation that has constantly gone back to them after everything seemed okay, making them do more investigations, making them literally jump through hoops to get the information there and to make sure that the ground is going to be stable, which I think is it's imperative when you're going to be building houses on, that ground is stable. I would have to say I think that has actually swayed me over on this occasion. So I am going to support this reluctantly with regards to this section 106, but I think under the circumstances I will support this. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I was just going to put... Oh, Councillor Reid.
Yeah. You know, this is the reason we've ended up with the reductions is because when they came to look at the land, it wasn't stable enough to build houses. So, you know, the site is only worth as much as it's worth. And if you can't sell the houses, you know, if you've got to invest more to build the houses, then somebody's got to come off somewhere. So, you know, it's been a trade-off. This has always been part of the Cramlington build-out for as long as I can remember. When I was on Blythe Valley, we were talking about what was going to go on there. So I'm glad to see that it's about to start. It's going to give us jobs. It's going to help create communities. You know, it's a fine scheme, and I thank the officers for putting as much time in as they have done. The only one thing I would ask is trees. When you plant trees, it's the in thing. I know that, but can we please make certain that they're appropriate for the position that they're being put in? You know, I get phone calls at least twice a week from people saying there's an 80-foot tree outside of my house, you know, and I'm sick of it. So can we just make certain that whatever they put in there is appropriate for the place it is? And can we make certain, I don't know how, but can we make certain that the trees that are going to be left aren't going to be in such a position that someone is going to start complaining about being overshadowed or whatever? You know, you've thought about this really well, so let's not fall at the last hurdle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I was just going to have a word myself. Councillor Dodd. Oh, sorry. Councillor Darwin.
Thank you, Chair. Just put my hand up there now. Like many others, I am Jodie Helm support the Section 106 trend. I think that would be very welcome, Rob, as well. But also, it is disappointing to see there's such significant reduction in affordable housing. I do understand the need for that. I do understand the reduction in Section 106 monies. You know, the site is a difficult site. It's a complex site, and as we discussed there, it's been a lengthy discussion, so I do understand the need for that. But looking at the site layout that was shown before, and Councillor Reid touched on this as well, I don't think this new proposal has altered the layout of the development at all. The houses that you're going to build over the open cast mines are going to require pile foundations, pad foundations, and the like. That is more costly than traditional pad foundations. So by altering the site, the developer's going to save money on the foundations. Surely a bit of lateral thinking, and the developer would save some money for them as well. I just wanted to say that as well. And in Partel, the Conservation of Fuel and Power, has there been any planning here for ground source heat pumps, a heat network? That is going across in the wider industry, not just in Northumberland, but in Newcastle as well. We should take that initiative and develop that here, whilst we've got the opportunity to develop that here. I've not come across that in here, so why do we want to think about the Future Homes Fund in 5 years' time? We should be thinking about that now to get the ground source heat pumps in the ground, that sort of thing. And also the Partel is also to reduce the consumption of fuel and power. That's what Partel stands for. Such, Houses now and developers are crammed together. You see detached house a metre away from another detached house or a semi-detached house. There is no development that allows you to expand your house rather than move. The biggest and best cost-saving building is the one that already exists. Hence, this building here, what we're sat in, is being redeveloped. That is the biggest cost-saving. Allow developments to expand your own home. So it's disappointing to see that the site layout is again like other developments, it's crammed in. But we do need this site as part of the local plan. So it's a welcome addition, and unfortunately, it's typical of other developments. It's all crammed in. And I don't like to see the reduction in social housing, but I think it's a requirement of the complexity of this site. So I just want to say my piece there. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, just before Councillor Dodd finishes off, I just wanted to say a bit from the chair. You know, it's been a long and tough debate this afternoon, a very complicated application. Yes, it's an allocated and anticipated 715 houses, a big chunk of housing in the Cramlington sector, but essentially it has been dormant for a long time, and we all know why. Essentially, it was the open casting. With all the problems that brings with it, and especially, you know, the compaction problem, which, you know, Mr. Prescott explained away very well, and obviously the house builders have done a lot of homework on this, trying to make it stable for houses to be built. But yes, you know, the Section 106 is our planning benefit, isn't it? It's our gift to the locals. It's our resident, and that's why Councillor Flux is so angry about this. But you know, what we've got to remember is it's still, you know, I know it's a big development, but it's still a huge chunk of money, over £7 million. And yes, it's disappointing that the affordable housing has gone down. It's disappointing that education monies have gone down, but we have got some new ticks in there too. We've got ecology, coastal mitigation, and healthcare. And I think the important thing with this one, it's a moving application. And to my mind, you know, the thing that I like most about it is this viability review. Just, you know, going up, going down. I think that's crucial. You know, so often in planning, we like to get our Section 106, we like to put down the monies we're getting for this and that and the other, but it's just not been possible in this case because nobody knows what we're going to find. But I think the planners have worked out a really good solution here, and I think it should be supported. Councillor Dodd, finish off, please.
I'll be brief, Chair. We've been at this 2.5 hours nearly, and the building regs might change. So,
not tomorrow.
I think all, or nearly all of us, came here with a sort of a little bit angry with this. Too much. But we've heard the explanation, and we've got an understanding. And this is why there's been so many questions. I don't think there's been a huge debate, but there's been a lot of information gathering and understanding of that information, which we probably didn't have, that hit us on the page that came out, because we got angry and saw reduction. We thought, like, you know, we think like a developer trying it on, which we often see. And I don't know if this is the case. We've yet to find out. So I think we're left with Hobson's choice. We have to go for this. It's been around a long time. There is problems. Every site has a problem, but this looks a little bit more complicated. So I'm happy that we can take this forward and happy to propose it, Chair. Thank you.
Right, that concludes the debate. I will now ask us to proceed with the vote. All those in favour of Councillor Dodd's recommendation to approve this application? Thank you. Those against? One against. Those abstaining? One against, one abstention. That motion is carried.
Chair, can I just check? I think we're missing a vote.
Are we?
No, I voted.
Barry didn't vote, did he?
Yeah, Barry's.
Right, well, I'm going to ask the members to vote again. All those in favour of this application, raise their hands. Yeah. Is that right now? Yeah. So 11 in favour, 1 abstention, 1 against. Yeah. The motion is carried. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. So, appeals update, item number 7, for members' information. Are members happy to accept those? And item number 8, section 106, agreement update report. And then finally, urgent business. I've got no urgent business. I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions today. Really good debate and well done. Thank you.
Okay, can we stop the